Thank you very much, Joachim. Eventually. Yeah. Yeah, I think, as you see, I think it was not coordinated, but I guess my presentation very well or very neatly actually follows up on what was actually introduced just now by Qualitas. So I tried to focus a little bit on the topic really, energy security and renewable energy. Maybe just 2 words about CIME. We're basically, as introduced, we're an asset manager or part of an asset management group. We are a bit smaller. We roughly manage 2.5 billion in total. One part in renewable investments, mainly in Central Europe, and 1/3 roughly in Switzerland in district heating and hydrogen products. So just when I go and when I basically try to take up now what was introduced and what I link a little bit with the topic energy security. I think as I expected to have a bit of a mixed audience here, I thought it makes sense to have a bit of an illustrative approach to this. When we all talk and think about renewables, we think mostly on wind farms or windmills. And when I look at politicians in our country, and as I understand it also in Germany, it is mainly PV. So basically, that's what everyone is obsessed and what everyone is focusing on. But obviously, it's not just basically building production units. It is mainly about the network and the grid. And I just came out of a talk with our auditor now again. We're, as most of you, in the last basically steps for the quarterly result. And every quarter I basically have to explain it's always the same. It's not the same thing just to produce something and to have an output on our assets of I don't know how many megawatt. These megawatts also need to be put into the grid, and most likely, or in most cases, we produce much more than we can put into the grid at that moment. And people sometimes, and I think with people mostly, let's say auditors, politicians, do not sufficiently reflect that it's not just about increasing the potential output, but you need to have a fairly distributed and well-balanced output, basically to put it into the existing grid and to have a stable grid. So when I talk about it, it's about physical network stability, and it is also about regional stability within the networks that we probably should think of. And I stress all these elements because when I see this, basically these deficits, for me as an asset manager, these deficits are always the flip side of an investment opportunity, and I think that's where I basically see the market for the coming years. So as said, when I look a bit about this, it always cycles mainly about PV. PV is the one thing that is pushed from a political side quite strongly. It also has the least hurdles and barriers. You see this a little bit in the recent reports that we saw from Siemens and from all the wind turbine producers in Europe. They all have problems. Obviously, people want to build renewable energy, but no one wants to build windmills, for instance. There is much less of an issue to basically put the PV on your roof because you don't see it that much. It is smaller. You have quite fewer hurdles. But this all leads basically that we are basically, as Europeans, are basically building up one element of renewables that tends to generate the same peak hours at the same time of the day. So yes, we are increasing our renewable production, but we are not really increasing in a way that it adds up basically to replace the fuel, because it cannot be fully absorbed. So that's what I meant with 100% renewable PV replacement of the fuel, even if that's not possible when you look at all the industrial and transport applications, does not add up to 100%. You need basically much more or different elements. So the different elements are different sources, so much more hydro, much more wind, where there are quite a lot of question marks when you look at all the permits and the development speed that you have in these elements. You need much more storage and you need much more grid elements. So I think that's what I just wanted to stress when you think about energy security, just first of all from a physical or from a technical stance. You see a bit that's our projection very moving from. So I think we are adding much more production. We expect that prices will come down quite fast in the coming years. But you see the price movements. That's our expectations. But they are basically not homogeneous across the different countries. So we will probably have quite, probably even increasing, if you look here a little bit on the volatility, quite increasing basically price discrepancies even between the different EU countries. And the reason simple is obviously they are still mainly national grids, nationally operated. I don't even talk about the legislation, that's a topic for itself, but also technically it is no integration in Europe that would allow a liquid European market. When you go a bit deeper in this, I think that's a bit more of the same. So you see a bit how basically all these imbalances are between the different countries, the export and the imports of the production and the sources of production. So we have quite a diverse and dispersed situation within Europe that needs to be balanced in some way. And the way is basically tackle and its investment into the balancing and into the distribution. When you go a bit closer into this, this whole thing also reflects on the pricing and the liquidity, obviously. We are a bit more focusing mainly on the Central and European markets. And here we actually have three main reference stock exchange or stock markets. So we have the whole Baltic Circle. Then we have Poland, which is a bit of an island by itself in many ways. And we basically have the Hungary reference markets, which is Slovakia, which is Romania, which is partly the Western Balkan markets that are also even less integrated. So I think these are all the elements that we need to take into consideration when you think about energy security. So energy security is not only just adding more PV or more renewable, it is mainly also about balancing the regional and the grid networks. I left basically here all of the things that we heard before. I skipped this a little bit, so I was mainly talking now about the electricity and the consumer side. Obviously, the whole industrial and transportation side is a completely different story. Maybe just as a first comment before we then go into discussion, I think it's also here, it is not only about the volume, it is also about the energy density. And I think particularly when we're speaking about industrialized or heavy industrialized country, I mean, Germany is a perfect example for this. It's not enough just to simply replace the energy in volume. We also need high density energy basically to operate all the industrial applications. And that's simply not possible with many of the instruments that we have at the moment. So there is no way of basically running your steel manufacturing plants with PV produced energy. You need a more density form to basically do this, and most likely this is, as already was said, this most likely is hydrogen or methanol. I think there are not many other options here available. Now, basically, how do we want to cope with it? There are obviously a lot of political questions or political issues that could be used basically to address this. I skipped this a little bit for the whole discussion afterwards. But from an investor's point of view, I think as asset managers, we cannot basically solve we can solve the smaller parts, the PV parts. We can invest into wind farms, but we cannot basically be the element here that can close the gap on the, let's say, on the hydrogen, the transportation and import way. I think for this, it would require a much closer integration between state action in the de-risking this type of investments before it would be a suitable investment that an institutional investor probably would consider. So I think there is a huge element or a huge part of the discussion that still needs to be resolved, I would say, first on the political side. But what we could do, and that's my closing remark with a practical example, we can invest basically into smaller local production entities. So small is not very small, but these are more, let's say, cooperations between industrial players and the asset managers. So the example that I would like to share with you is one plant that we're currently investing in. It's a consortium that we're set up together with a large energy trader in Switzerland, and that is very closely actually built up with the largest fueling station network in Switzerland and an industrial application. So we are building a hydrogen plant. It will be the largest in Switzerland. We just now basically kicked it off and did the press announcement 2 weeks ago. It will, for German relations, still be small, so it will be 10 megawatt, but it will be by far the largest entity in Switzerland. It will be situated within an industrial park. It will supply directly, basically, a main consumer from the industrial field. It will, via a small pipeline, basically pump up to the highway network the part of the production to be used as a fuel element, and we will, with these elements, basically be able to sell the full production on a relatively localized element. And I think that's what we can, as asset managers, these are the types of projects where we can invest, that we, to follow up with the previous discussion, that we can package in eventually suitable fund structures, and that we can basically also perform, and that we can do without waiting for the support or the agreement with on the government side, basically to have de-risking, to have very large-scale elements, which I'm sure, I'm always positive, which I'm sure they will come someday, but they will take time. And I don't think we can basically achieve these plans that were announced in this time frame if we wait. Okay, that's it. Thank you.